I have two things I want to read as background for our discussion. The first is from the introduction, the prologue really, to Bernard Shaw's Androcles and the Lion. The captain says to Lavinia, "What you are facing is certain death. You have nothing left now but your faith and this craze of yours, this Christianity. Are your Christian fairy stories any truer than our stories about Jupiter and Diana?" Lavinia, "A man cannot die for a story and a dream. None believe the dreams and stories more devoutly than Spendall, but he could not face the great reality of the pain. What he would have called my faith has been oozing away minute by minute, whilst I have been sitting here with reality becoming more and more real, with stories and dreams fading away into nothing." Captain, "Are you then going to die for nothing?" Lavinia, "Yes. That is the wonderful thing. It is since all the stories and dreams have gone that I have now no doubt that all that I must die for is something greater than dreams and greater than stories. But for what? I don't know. If it were for anything small enough to know, it would be too small to die for. I think I'm going to die for God. Nothing else is really enough to die for." "What is God?" said the captain. "When we know that, Captain, we shall be gods ourselves." And then this from an earlier period in the creative unfolding of Edna St. Vincent Millay. I shall die, but that is all that I shall do for death. I hear him leading his horse out of the stall. I hear the clatter on the barn floor. Death is in haste. He has business in Cuba, business in the Balkans, many calls to make this morning. But I will not hold the bridle while he cinches the girth. And he may mount by himself. I will not give him a leg up. Though he flicks my shoulders with his whip, I will not tell him which way the fox ran. With his hoof on my breast, I will not tell him where the black boy hides in the swamp. I shall die, but that is all that I shall do for death. I am not on death's payroll. I will not tell him the whereabouts of my friends nor of my enemies either. Though he promise me much, I will not map him the route to any man's door. Am I a spy in the land of the living, that I should deliver men to death? Brother, the password and the plans of our city are safe with me. Never through me shall you be overcome. I shall die, but that is all that I shall do for death. Social change violence and nonviolence. It is a matter of very great significance to me that we are at a moment in human history in which great shifts in the meaning of society and the meaning of the individual seem to be in balance. As a man who has devoted most of his maturity, that is, most of what he calls his maturity, to questions which have to do with the meaning of religion, and particularly the meaning of the religion which is a part of my own history and culture, I've been profoundly puzzled by two tremendous events. The first is that there are really three, two way up here and then one along here. The first is that in 1917, when there was the great upheaval in the empire of the Tsar, when the stage was set for the turning of the tide, and those persons who were most responsible as the living instruments for social change, those hard-nosed individuals who were the spearhead of the revolution, when they were casting about for the kind of dynamic way of viewing the world that would bring about social change which from their point of view would be redemptive and full of health and weal for the common life. The great ethical religion, Christianity, was rejected. That for which it seemed to have come into the world was denied, and the Russian Revolution went its way using another kind of ground for its meaning, for its motivation, for its dynamic. When many years after, there was a complete breakdown in another society, and a whole nation was wrestling with the question of moral guilt precipitated by a responsibility that was placed upon it for bringing about a world war, namely the German people. And what was needed was something that would give a sense of worth and significance and health to the guilt-ridden populace. And the man arose, who became the redeemer of the society. And once again, a whole nation under the aegis of a very, very charismatic leader rejected this great religion. And found by an appeal to another aspect of life, the energy, the strength, the dynamism to purge the German soul of guilt of one kind and send it on its way with the dream in the mind and the heart to create a new order and give to that order a new and radical definition. Now this is interesting, that twice now this great ethical religion, which is my own, was rejected. Back in the 30s, about 19, I will get to the point by and by, so just don't worry. I've zeroed in on the point, but I have to do it this way. About 1934, 35, when the new Act of India was developed by the British government and passed on to the Indian people to establish some order of life for the Indians that would not disturb the balance of their colonial status. And one of the political provisions in this act was to give political representation in the Indian Parliament, or whatever the legislative body was called, on the basis of religious population, so that since the Hindus were about 60% of the total population, it meant that they would have a larger representation in the assembly, and the Muslims were next, and then on down to the almost microscopic percentage of Christians. There were 25 million untouchables in Hinduism. And they became a choice prize. Because, for instance, if the Muslims could get this bulk of 25 million, it would at once increase their numerical representation in the parliament and give them more of a concrete and definitive bargaining power. If the Christians, that were less than 5%, could get the 25 million untouchables, this then would at least give them a position of some sort of political prestige that would make it possible for them to exercise an influence that was far greater than anything they'd ever dreamed of. So that Dr. Ambedkar, who was the head of the untouchables in India, became the centerpiece. If you can get Ambedkar, then the 25 million untouchables will follow him. So it was quite a time. So all of the groups made their pitch. Stanley Jones, Stanley Jones, spent many, many hours wrestling and agonizing with Ambedkar, hoping to win him to Christianity, and through him, the 25 million untouchables. And he made all the claims how Christianity really is addressed to the underprivileged, that it gives a sense of persona and meaning to those people who are anonymous in the society, and so forth. You know, all the things that would be said as only he could say them. And once again, a great world figure in the sense that he represented a vast, vast millions of human beings, turned Christianity down. And his simple answer was, I lived 5 years in the United States. That's all he had to say. Now, with this in the background, let us go to work then on the issue. Violence as an instrument of social change. We are familiar with this because it is a part of national policy. Violence is the act by which one man or one nation seeks to impose its will upon another man or another nation. It is very appealing as an instrument of social change because it tends up to a very significant point to be efficient. It's efficient. It's quick. It saves a lot of time proing and conning. You simply bash the heads together, and by the time they recover, they are committed. When our younger daughter was 5 and we were on sabbatical living on a campus, I was working away in my room with a big book I was reading, and she came in and she said, "Daddy, I want you to help me do something in my room." I said, "Ann, don't you see that I'm busy? I'm trying to read this book, and I must finish reading it before the taxi comes, because the book is too heavy for me to carry in my bag." Well, that just went over, making no contact at any point. Then she said, "But Daddy, this is important, and I want you to help me now, because later it will be too late." And I said, "I can't do it." And she stood there, and I didn't use any violence, but I put a new depth in my voice and surrounded her with an atmosphere of violence. And she bristled, but being her mother's daughter, she stood her ground. And finally, she went out, slamming the door behind her. Now, I went on with my work. But something was always nagging, at my mind. Now, I could have taken her by the hand, figuratively, led her gently into my meaning, my necessity, my urgency. And then I could have let her take me by the hand and do the same thing for her, so that in this kind of interchange of projection, she would have looked out on my problem through my eyes, and I would have looked out on her problem through her eyes. And it is conceivable that not only would she not have disturbed me, but she would have stood guard at the door to keep her mother from disturbing me, so that I could finish reading the book and be ready when the taxi came. But that would have taken about 2 hours, and I had only about 25 minutes. There is something about violence as an instrument of social change that gets, within a limited time interval, gets the job done so that the next move may be made. Ortega Gasset, in his book, The Revolt of the Masses, discusses the meaning of violence in a very interesting way, and I suggest it to you to read sometimes if you're interested in pursuing this, at least his kind of argument, because it's an interesting one. He says that violence does not ever disappear from the horizon of the human adventure or the human enterprise, but it operates on what he calls an ascending and descending scale in human life. That the barbarian, according to Gasset, is a man who, when his will is frustrated, so that it is impossible for he's blocked in his effort to impose his will upon another. As soon as that happens, says Gasset, the barbarian resorts to violence. Now Gasset says the civilized man postpones the use of violence until he has exhausted all other measures, but that violence as an aspect, a functioning aspect of personality, is always present. Now, violence may be physical force, and usually the definition of violence is the use of physical force. And the definition that the dictionaries give is the use of physical force as an extension of an individual's will as it seeks to impose itself on another without the other's consent or assent. But perhaps physical violence, or violence as physical force, does not exhaust the possibilities of the meaning of violence in human experience. For non-physical violence is far more devastating than physical violence. A man can accommodate himself to the fact that in this adventure through which he's going, he may lose his life. He may make an immediate and radical accommodation to the fact of his death, so that in one creative sweep of his mind, he can accept the acceptance of death, which is far more important than merely accepting death. He can accept the acceptance of death. For every thoughtful man, sometime in his life, arrives at a decision. And that decision has to do with how crucial to him is the continuity of his physical existence. This is what Jesus means, I suppose, when he says, what would a man give in exchange for his life? Now, dictators in a society that has become totalitarian understand this subtle thing in personality, so that they surround the atmosphere in which their subjects live with a subtle rumor, the result of which causes the individual citizen to overemphasize the significance of his physical existence. So how do they do this? You go to bed at night, and everybody is at home. You wake up in the morning, the father is missing. The mysterious knock during the night, and the father disappears. A neighbor that you saw this morning working in his yard, this afternoon, he's gone. And after a while, to continue to live and not be pulled away unannounced and unnoticed causes the priority of physical existence to mount and mount until it becomes a top priority. Now, once the dictator sees that in the populace, the average man places a maximum premium upon his physical existence, then the society is ready for any kind of change that the dictator determines. For all he needs to do is to threaten to kill you. And you will do whatever he says to. How? So that sooner or later every man, and by man I mean man the generic, every man has to decide for himself how important is his own physical continuity and under what circumstances will he gladly give up his life? Give up his life. Now, violence, then, is the least, maybe the least reflective way by which social change may take place, or it may be the most cunning, the most subtle means for bringing about social change. It is comparatively easy to say that one option, one alternative in this picture, a man always has, and that is that he can always die, you see. And of course I think this is the organic basis for freedom in human life, but that's another story. There's one option that nobody can take from me. I can always die. So that whatever the other thing is that I'm being required to do, I don't have to do that. I can die. But one of the things that we've learned from the terror and the madness of the Third Reich was the fact that there are refinements in physical violence that may systematically rob a man from exercising his final vote to give up his life. I was talking with an ophthalmologist down at Stanford who had come through one of the camps, and I'd preached a sermon, talking about this, and the idea seems sound and solid and worthy. So he asked after the meeting, he asked if he could come by to see me that night when he's through with his rounds at the hospital. He came by about 10 o'clock. And we talked from 10 o'clock at night to 5 o'clock in the morning, all night long. And nobody got sleepy. Now, what were we talking about? He was saying that it is possible. The thing that happened to me was I was taken right up to the point of death, right, and then snatched back until finally, he said, my very self was splintered and shattered, and I had no will left, and no sense of my own personal, private autonomy. Now, violence does this. All right. Let me put that aspect of it together and talk about nonviolence and be through. Violence tends to be efficient. It tends to be quick. It's a time saver. It inspires a certain kind of panic in the human spirit so that it makes capitulation possible without moral compromise. This is very interesting. But it does not change the will. It tends to drive the will underground and let it lurk there until a more propitious and promising moment for its emergence to come to pass. But it is simple, and it can be exercised without discipline, because the history of violence in the life of the human animal is a very long one. Now, I will leave violence. I'm not through, but I'll leave it and move to nonviolence and put it together. Now, nonviolence in our time has been associated, of course, with, as an instrument of social change, been associated with Mahatma Ghandi. When I was in India, I did have a wonderful 5 hours with Mr. Ghandi, and a part of the time we were discussing this question of the dynamics of nonviolent direct action. And one aspect of our conversation I want to use as the prolegomena of what I want to say. I asked him near the end, why was it that his campaign of nonviolent direct action expressing itself in non-cooperation with the British, why did it fail of its objective? And the objective being, of course, to get rid of the British. But they were still there. And the campaign had bogged down, apparently, from the march to the sea and making the salt and so forth and so on. And he said that nonviolent direct action is an ethical activity that is derived from the Hindu doctrine of ahimsa, no killing. It is what he called not only a moral idea or ideal, but it is a spiritual one. And he said that it involves complete involvement on the part of all of the masses of the people who are caught up in the process of social change. It cannot be, said he, the activity of a leader separated from an activity in which the masses of the people participate. This was the first point. So, he said, at first, based upon our tradition, it was possible for the masses of the Indians to respond to this doctrine, but under the pressure of the organized political power of the country in the hands of the British, the non-violent, non-cooperation ideal bogged down and degenerated into violence. These were his words. And he said, this at first raised a question in my mind about the validity of the nonviolent ethic as an instrument in social change. And once I was satisfied that the concept itself was valid based upon my experience, my interpretation of my own devotion to truth, I began to look somewhere else for the cause of the breakdown. And this is very astute. He said, I found, based upon my own experience, something I'd forgotten, said he, that it takes an enormous amount of energy, physical energy, to sustain an ethical ideal such as nonviolence over a time interval of sufficient duration to make it effective. And the masses of the Indians were unable to do this because they didn't have enough food to eat. So he said, I withdrew from the political campaign and began working on the question of rebuilding whatever you do when you feed people, to do this. So that's why I activated the old spinning wheel and the cottage and village industries so as to put at the disposal of the masses of Indians that which at one time was a part of their technique of survival but had been taken away from them when the conqueror came. And by reactivating this, they could get more food and build up their vitality to the point that in terms of physical energy, it would be possible to sustain this ethical ideal over the time interval that would make it effective. And the second thing I observed was that they lacked vitality because they had lost their self-respect. And he said, we don't begin to understand the relationship between energy and dynamism in the personality